Yes, we are live. Hi, everybody. Okay, in your upper left-hand corner, you should be able to see the number of people as they join us. So it'll get going here soon.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just, YouTube just gave me the alert. Awesome. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I have Lisa Greer with me, and we're so excited to have you all today. I see you joining us. We always do a starter question. As we get started, it's usually something off topic about food or travel or life. But I'm going to start with, if you've ever wanted to ask a donor a question, what question did you want to ask a donor? So I'm so excited to have Lisa Greer with me, a real live living donor. Just kidding. We all are in some ways, I hope, if we work in this industry. But Lisa's going to talk a little bit about her experience today. She's written books. She has a website. She wants to help educate those of us in the nonprofit space about what it's like to be a donor, what kind of donor relations hits and misses we've done as an industry with her. And so if you want to post in the comments what's the question you've always wanted to ask Lisa. Hi, Jacqueline. Welcome aboard. We are going to get started today, but we're going to get started here by having Lisa give a little bit of her background and how maybe, I think she left me for a minute. She'll rejoin. But hi, everybody. Welcome aboard. So excited. You're back.
Wow, that was weird. Okay. Sorry.
You're back. I'm happy to have you. So we have a lot of great folks, but I'm going to let Lisa introduce herself. And then your questions, again, anything you ever wanted to ask a donor, but maybe what's the first question you always want to ask a donor would be something great to place in the chat. So Lisa, introduce yourself. Welcome.
Sure, and then I'll answer. Oh, I'm getting some good questions, so yay. My name's Lisa Greer. I live in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, California, born and raised here in Los Angeles. And I was raised in a very typical middle-class family where the word philanthropy wasn't part of our lexicon. If I heard the word philanthropy, well, we would give to like, I remember, I had a pen pal in Africa, I think at some point, and we were helping them out, and like PTA and Girl Scouts and things like that, but all very local kinds of things that we were involved in. And, but the word philanthropy, if it was used, it would have been used in association with really cranky, selfish trust fund kid. And so we never used that. And then about 10 years ago, my husband and I are both serial entrepreneurs, and I worked in the entertainment industry for a while. He did too. And about 10 years ago, we found ourselves in a position where we were about to become part of the 1%. And we weren't even sure what that was like because we didn't know anybody who was, not well enough to talk to them, honestly. So we learned from attorneys, we learned from reading, that kind of thing. But we decided, and I'll just start with this because I usually do, because it's still the most amazing story to me. About 10 days before my husband's IPO, we knew that this was likely to happen. We didn't know for sure, but we knew it was highly likely. We'd invested 3 months of working with attorneys and specialists and trying to learn how you deal with the SEC and all those kinds of things. And it never occurred to us that we wouldn't become donors. That was just, we both grew up, he grew up in Toronto, both middle-class families. And if you have a lot of money, you give. It never occurred to us. It still is strange to me to think that people have that money and don't give, but that's what we did. So about 10 days before, my husband was home for one day, and he's had Crohn's disease since he's been about 11. And I said, let's each pick something that we want to do. Assuming this all works, let's each pick something that we want to do with the money, like a first, I think I said gift. I think I said the word gift or grant. I forgot which. And so he said, I said, so why don't you go first? He says, I said, imagine you had all the money in the world. What would you want to give it to? And he said, I want to find a cure for Crohn's disease. And or at least find a way that people who have it don't have to go through what I have gone through since I was a kid. And I said, that sounds great. How are we going to do that? And he says, let's find out where the best research is being done anywhere, ideally in California, because we'd like to be somewhere nearby. And but where is that research being done that's really got a chance of succeeding? And so I said, well, why don't we do the hospital, Cedars-Sinai Hospital here, which is down the street and where Josh had many of his surgeries. And he said, well, I don't know if they do research, so why don't we call Stanford? And I said, yeah, I can call Stanford, but I think we should start with the place that you actually know and that knows you. And it turned out they did have a big research department, but it also turned out when we decided that we wanted to get involved and had a proposal to put together to actually fund a brand new program for irritable bowel disease and Crohn's and the genetic component related to it. So that's called IBD genetics. And that would then grow into what today is a 25-person research facility that's brought out all sorts of medications and different kinds of therapies and has done amazing, amazing work, I'm happy to say. But here we were, and we're about to give we decided we want to do this. They present it to us, and then they wouldn't take our money for 7 months. So why wouldn't they take our money for 7 months? They just kept dropping us because they didn't believe that we really had the money, and it was public information. So that was really, really awful. And then at the same time, my husband said to me the 10 days before, what would you like to give to? And I said, well, we're completing a capital campaign at my synagogue, and I'm the incoming president. Wouldn't it be great to give the final chunk of money for the capital campaign so we don't have to start with that when I come in? And also, it would just be a really nice, gesture, and that's what I want to do. He says, oh, are you sure that's what you want to do, long-term, whatever? I said, yeah, because that was a little bit more, they're both long-term things, but very different. So I called the senior rabbi, who was a dear friend and really ran the synagogue. And I said, words that I thought I would never, ever say my entire life, which were, because I could do this right now. The other one I had to do some research, but this one I could do right now. So I picked up the phone and I said, hi, I just want to let you know that we've decided to give you, assuming this IPO happens, we've decided to give you the final $1 million to close the capital campaign. And I thought I was going to hear like Publishers Clearinghouse kind of, like nothing, really quiet, completely crickets. And I said, hello. And she said, well, I don't know what to say. I said, well, I guess you could say thank you. And she said, I don't know if I can because I didn't make an ask. And then she hung up the phone. And we basically neither of us knew what to say and hung up the phone. And I thought, I've just been transported to the Twilight Zone. I don't understand. What kind of place is this? But then the phone rang again, and she said, I answered, and she said, can I talk to your husband? And and then when she got him on the phone, and he was 10 feet away from me, and he's looking at me like, why is she calling? I thought maybe she's calling to say, maybe she's going to say thank you to him instead of me. So she gets on the phone, and she said, are you aware of what your wife is doing? Yeah. So those two things made me feel like I was in this very strange land. And I realized that after a while that, and by the way, we did give the money. Everybody asks us that question. It did happen. But that coming from business and coming from the outside and not living in this world of being a major donor my whole life or being in a family that gave substantially, that there were all of these things that I considered basic business tenets and basic, just gracious things that you do, saying thank you. I didn't understand, like, why is it that doesn't happen here? Like, I don't understand. So I had lots and lots of other interactions, none quite as dramatic as that, but quite a few where I was left wondering, like why, like kind of, I know I'm doing this for the end result, but why do I have to go through all of this? In fact, I found that the unsolicited donations were sometimes the most gratifying because I didn't have to talk to anybody. But then I had people telling me after a while that they'd given large donations and hadn't gotten a thank you for 6 months. People who had, and then I heard the other stories of people who wanted to give gifts because they wanted a press release because they were about to go to jail. True story. Right. So there were lots of different ins and outs. And I thought, well, what do other donors do? And then I found out that other donors don't talk. And that I'm basically the only donor who's willing to say, okay, I'm here. Ask me anything, which is why I'm here today and why I wrote my book. And I'm thrilled to be with all of you.
And you've written such a powerful, meaningful book for all of you. Ashley has shared the link to Philanthropy Revolution for you. All of our attendees' jaws are on the floor. They're all going, not cool. But in a late study that we've read, there are many nonprofit organizations that say, I wouldn't know what to do if a donor walked up out of nowhere and offered me $10 million or $1 million. And, that's a great problem to have, that a donor might do that and be so generous. This is not our first discussion on the role between male and female or even same-sex partners, and the idea of permission to give gifts, even though now women make 76% of the giving decisions in this country, and there's not many men that are doing it solo but we have lots of questions, and it's so vulnerable of you and so honorable of you to share your stories, because you're right. Donors don't talk. Our audience doesn't get a lot of time to talk directly to donors unfiltered. I think a lot of our organizations are like, well, we'll bring in a donor, but here are the following questions, and these are the only things you can ask. And so I encourage my audience. Lisa has said, you can ask me anything except for money. And my folks wouldn't do that. So I don't have to worry about that. But we already have some interesting questions.
A whole bunch of great questions. Yeah.
And I'd love to start with, what moves you? What moves you to give? And, I saw the origin of your first large transformational gift. What compelled you to do that? And that was you and your husband saying, we each wanted, something that we close to our hearts, that we already had a relationship to, but maybe for a new organization or for someone where you're going from a normal size gift to a larger gift. What compels you to give?
Thank you very much for that question. And I am, and by the way, I did want to just say, and meant to say as part of my introduction, that not only is it a pleasure to be here with Lynne, but also with all of you. And I know that your work is incredibly, incredibly important to this whole scheme of things. And you guys, what you do can make or break the whole piece. And I also understand that it might be frustrating for you when you can't do the innovative things that you want to do. So I just wanted to tell you I'm in there with you. And as a board member, I have to ask for money too. So you've got that. But I think what compels me is, it might be a surprise to some of you. One is the relationship I have with the organization. I think, and this is not in any particular order, but I did have a very, very large organization that I was giving to, and they wanted me to give more. And I really loved what they did, and I liked their events. But the person who was the regional person in Los Angeles who I dealt with was awful. She was just awful. I kept hoping they'd switch her out or something like that. And this went on for a couple of years. And it was just terrible. And then each event, I probably went to 6 events. I was invited by another board member there, and she never knew who I was. She never recognized I'd been there before. There was nothing. And so I thought, I just can't give to this organization. Yeah. And then some where I really just feel the passion from the person on the other side, and I feel that they truly want to become a partner with me, then that gets me excited. So if we have that, and then I do a little poking around and I realize that the organization is pretty well run, and then because these are all things that I want to know, and then then in terms of impact, I want to know, like most people today, I want to know what the impact was, but I want to know it in a really simple way. And somebody had asked that question, how do I do that? How do I like that? My favorite is, I have 2 favorites. One is an email that's very timely, that just says, oh my God, these wonderful things happened, and this is great, and it all was because of you, or in part because of you. Totally cool. But I am really happy with an email, because when it's something that's obviously curated and 10 people have looked at it, it kind of sucks the emotion and personality and integrity, I guess, out of it. And I can tell, I've been in communications most of my life, I can tell that that's happened and that it's all been watered down, and I'm not getting the passion. And so if somebody writes or even calls me and says, I want to let you know, someone can say, hey, can I call you? I just wanted to tell you this amazing thing that happened. That would be the coolest thing ever. That particular thing has never happened, but it would be awesome. The second thing I really like.
Sorry, does it matter who the email comes from? Does
No.
it have to be the CEO or the president or Lord Fancy Pants or something like that?
No, I would rather it was from the person that I have the relationship with, who and at whatever level they are. And if they are then copying some other people, or they say, hey, I spent the last week double checking, making sure these numbers are right. And I checked with whatever so that I know other people. That's great. I don't care. But really a very simple email that says, this is this amazing thing that happened. And I got to tell you, when we had this one grant that we made, large grant, it's talked about in the book, where we funded it was the Crohn's thing is what it turned into, this research facility. And it was a large gift. It was $2 million, which sends off $100,000 a year to his department. And he was going to build a department. And I thought, well, a doctor in a hospital, $100,000, what are you going to do with that? That's like not going to get you very far. Until I realized that within 3 months, he turned that into several $1 million by going to foundations and saying, look, these people kind of off the street, whatever, were so passionate about it, and a former patient that this is what they did. And now they have this very incredible research lab. So I didn't even think about that. But when I got a phone call, I didn't want to, typically I would have to wait for the report that says this and tells all the other stuff they want me to know. He didn't tell us. I called him and we became friends, and he was playing golf with my husband and stuff like that. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, well, aren't they telling you in the advancement group? And I said, well, not so much. And so I said, well, what does it look like now? And he says, it's whatever, it's 25 people or 20 people or whatever it was at that moment. And I said, my God, that's incredible. What do they all do? And we got to have a real conversation about it. And I felt great. I did not need anything else. And I really didn't. And if somebody wants to say thank you at another level, call us if you have an issue, great, because in case something changes and he's not there one day or something. But other than that, I only want to have a relationship with that person, which is why when the 18 months that fundraisers leave at has now been reduced to, is it
16 months? Yeah, baby giraffe is what I call it. It's the gestation period of a giraffe, and now every 16 months, that's the average lifespan of a fundraiser right now.
And so that concerns me a lot, because I'm just getting to know somebody and then they're going to be gone and I've got to go talk to somebody else. I only have so many new relationships in me before I'm going to say, God, I'll just go to a different organization that has a little more stability.
Because one of the things you mentioned was you check to make sure the organization is well run. And I think retention of employees is one of the things that keeps an organization well run. It doesn't mean you have to be there forever, but if you have constant turnover, that's not a good sign to a donor. If that researcher were to text you tomorrow and say, hey, Lisa, here's a photo of all of us at our recent staff retreat, just wanted to say thank you for making this possible, would you object to a text from that researcher?
No, I'd be thrilled. I don't know why in the world I would object. I'd be thrilled.
We have questions. Our organizations freak out when we mention, hey, just text a donor. Just, they're overwrought with reviewed publications. It takes us years, a year to get a report to you. And I think what we're encouraging donors to do is much more snackable content, more authentic content. Yeah. And would you agree with that? We have a couple of people who are asking about that.
Yeah, well, so annual reports, I don't know about people here, but it's sort of like the new tax law. I don't know anybody who reads through all of it. And for those 4 people, hooray for them. But I don't know people who read through those annual reports. And it feels very fake to me. It feels like we're only giving you the messaging that 10 people said. I've been at a studio and they're very careful with messaging. So I know that. But what really gets me is that there's a lot of pages and it's gorgeous. Sometimes even the envelope is gorgeous. And all I'm going to do with it is use it. It's either going to go in the circular file or it's going to be used with other ones to hold the door open. And that's really what it is. And I don't understand why the money, but the thing that kills me the most is look at the time and money that went into this that could have been into finding 100 new donors, or not ignoring somebody like me when we first had money, or teaching, whatever it is, telling somebody a little bit more in depth about your organization, or bringing them out to come see what you do, or any of those things. Instead, they were wringing their hands over which tone of turquoise was on the thing. And I just can't stand it. So yeah. Anyway,
we will get into a fight over our PMS colors and our Oxford commas. We will noodle a semicolon to death, especially in higher ed.
I did want to give just one thing, Lynne. There's one other thing I like to see in reports. A, email, but B is I also really like pictographs. Is it pictographs or pictograms?
Infographics, where they're displaying numbers as images.
Yeah, I love that. Very simple, 1 page, 2 pages. I remember I was once on the board of Girl Scouts and they did this. And, 7 out of every 30, whatever women will never raise their hand in class or something like that. And I thought that was great. And there's another organization I've worked with called LA Family Housing that houses homeless people. And they very clearly, this many people, and I actually, the pictures are great, but I actually like that just as much. I just want to know it's like just the facts, Jack. That's where I want to go. And then I feel, and by the way, I have one organization I give to, just one of them. I do recurring donations because I believe that is the big thing that you can do, right? The Holy Grail. But so I want to do that myself first. And this one though sends me impact reports when I least suspect it on an ongoing basis. So it's not every single month. It's because the charge credit card thing happens, but maybe it's 6 weeks, 1 month, and maybe it's 2 months another time. And it has exactly what I just described. It's just pictograms. This is what we've done. 3 minutes, short attention span, on to the next thing. And then I have this warm, cozy feeling, and I'm going to keep my credit card there forever.
Because they're thinking about you on a regular basis, not just saving it all up for one big thank you or one big impact report. And I think as people who produce those, that ongoing stream of information is always hard to get, but something that we can work toward. We have a great question from Marianne, who's a longtime participant. How do you feel as a donor when you're asked, or either when you provide unrestricted support, meaning here is money, I trust the organization, do with it as you please? How do you feel about that as a donor?
So I also have I have a few different little soapboxes that I've that have been created, things that resonate, but also things that I think are as important as anything else. And one of those has to do with overhead. So I feel like when this idea that sunk into some people, well, I'll give you a real world example. I was in a, let's call it a social service organization that I'm part of that meets once a week. And I don't go to them that often, but they created this women's group and they said, somebody has given us money to bring women out of Afghanistan. That's what they wanted to do when the Afghan thing happened. Would you please be on a committee, which they invited all the women, there weren't a lot of women there, to talk about, who we should give this to, because we'd like to do it as soon as possible. I said, great. So, and I thought, wow, this is wonderful. I can really help them because this is kind of what I do. And I get on the phone. Now, they were mostly older people, but they were all people who give, and some amount. And they, so the head of it decided that we should each send in names of organizations that we would like to be included or be considered. So we have our list and why. I think we put a sentence or two. And these women came in and they said, okay, well, I think it's really obvious who we have to support. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, it's one of mine that's really was like right on for what they wanted to do. And they said, because their overhead is the least. And they said, the rule is, these are people who give, the rule is that they can't have, more than 10%, I think it said, of their revenue, going to overhead, because these people just waste. And I didn't even know what to say. And I thought, do I just hang up the phone now, or do I fight this, or do I try and explain it to them? And sorry. and I tried and I failed, because they were so set on, it was like the sky is blue and you don't give any money to overhead. And the part that really offends me, I took solace in, well, they're older people, maybe, one day somebody will teach them, or younger people won't be like that. But we have all this concern about living wage right now. We have all this concern about taking care of other people. A lot of what we do in terms of giving is to take care of somebody. And then to say the infrastructure for the fundraisers, that we should let people be in buildings without air conditioning or heating, or that we don't want them to make a living wage, and we want the bottom of the barrel, and then we wonder why they turn over every 16 months. That's ludicrous. But it also is insulting to my intelligence as a donor, because it's when the organizations buy into that, because the organizations felt they have to. So now they'll come and they'll say to me, and 100% of the money goes to this. And the only way I'm okay with that is if they also say, and our board of directors pays for 100% of our overhead. Then I'm good. Anything short of that, no. And so I really have, I have a very difficult time with it, but I also think the part that's insulting to us is that most people who have money, not all, but most people, well, okay, all people have a brain. Most people are pretty smart, and most of them know something about business. And
right?
And the idea that we're going to think in any way that the person sitting across from us makes no money and be happy about that is ludicrous. We would never, ever, ever think that. So they're basically insulting our intelligence by doing that. So I have a solution for this, which is, and I'll just give it real quick and then we'll go on to the next thing, whatever you want to do, Lynn. I also at the same time as a donor, don't like the idea of everything having to be an unrestricted gift. Sometimes I really like a particular program that resonates with me and something else doesn't. And I've been told by organizations, not all, but some, we don't accept those. We know they actually do. It just depends on the dollar amount, right? But they say we don't accept them. And I spent a lot of time asking a lot of people why. And I found out it was because, obviously you have more control over something if it's unrestricted, but also you can easily take 20, 25% and put that into your overhead, and that's kosher and cool. But so I just don't understand why, when universities have done this for years, why don't we have a standard in our entire sector that any unrestricted gift, as long as it meets with your mission and is something you're already planning on doing. I don't believe in making things up for rich people. But if it fits within the mission, we should just take 20% off the top and just say unrestricted. We welcome that, but it's 20%. We just want to let you know is going to go to overhead. And then that with the 25% you might get from unrestricted gifts, people are going to be good that way. But we have to somehow stop this. I mean, Dan Pilata did his thing almost 12 years ago, and it hasn't moved the dial.
It's going from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, Lisa. It really is going from how little can we invest in order to make our budget to we're going to invest in ourselves. And then you're an entrepreneur, you come from, you and your husband are both entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur. I can't tell you how often I review my overhead and say, now, where can I make an investment that's going to make my business rise? And I never apologize to myself for increasing my overhead because it means my business is growing and developing. In nonprofits, there's this shame around spending money as if we're supposed to, none of us took a vow of poverty. Maybe the nuns at a Catholic charity, but none of us fundraisers said, my goal in life is to be poor, so I'm going to work for a nonprofit. And I think living wage is one of those discussions, but also where we put our money and how we invest. It's why we're so behind in technology. It's why people don't retain. It's not just the way you're treated. It's also your salary and can you live in a major city on that. So we have another really great question, Allison. A lot of our folks are tacticians. A lot of our folks want the evidence so they can go to their leadership and say, I listened to a donor, and yes, she doesn't represent everyone, but here's what donors are telling us. So a thank you. Take out the tax receipt and throw that to the side because we know we're going to do that for you. But do you want your thank yous via email? Do you want them in 8.5 by 11 on very fancy stationery? Does it depend on how much you give? Whether it's your first gift or your 100th gift, tell me about how you enjoy or what you think about being thanked.
Right. Thank you. So a couple pieces to this. One is I am fine with whatever it is you want to give me as long as it comes quickly after I make the gift. So typically, and a text message would be fine, but you can't put too much in that, but that's okay. But an email is perfectly fine. And if you want to send a little letter or your bosses want to send a letter later, great. But the letter isn't great if I don't get something within, I say 48 hours. I was at another conference and someone said, I think they said 8 hours, I think is what they wanted to get it. So I'm not going to push it that much, but it's easy. And so one of the things that I think that every nonprofit should do is I think that every nonprofit should do a quick survey to all their donors and ask them how they like to be thanked, because everybody knows how they want to be thanked. And some people do want the pretty thing and the call from the president, and they do want that. And you can ask them. And if you ask, they will know the answer. They don't have to think about it. I know the answer. I'm sure you all know the answer for yourself. So if someone just asked, it solves two things. One is it gives you the information you need. And by the way, you asked another question I think you should have in the survey is, how do you like to be communicated with? And you do say, is it multiple choice, text, email, whatever, and click the box. And then you know how they want to be communicated with, and you don't call them on the phone if they say they don't want to be called on the phone, fine. But the nice thing that it does is when you ask that question, it also sends an intrinsic message to the person on the other end that you're looking at them as an individual and as a human. And just by asking that question. And it's great. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. So yeah.
You know, Lisa, you're reinforcing what we teach, what we talk about in our circles. That sometimes we have a hard time selling to our leadership because they're very stuck in their ways. We for years have been saying it's more important to get them the message quickly than it is to be personalized and, you know, this big, oh, Lisa, I know everything about you. It needs to get to Lisa first. And the longer that it waits, the worse the message becomes. It doesn't matter. It better blow your socks off if it took you 2 weeks to get there.
Right.
So this is all a really important conversation. Can we also talk a little bit about the fallacy? You and I have had a private conversation about, you've had fundraisers approach you for a larger gift and they've said, and you can make it in payments. Can you talk about a donor's perspective around and you can make it in payments idea?
Yeah. Well, in that and another thing that happened to me where I was on a tour of a facility recently and with a scientist, and it was really great. I'm learning about all the science. And then the person from advancement comes and says, and here's the donor wall. And I thought, I don't care about the donor wall. And then everybody else in the group looked at each other like, what the heck? And then he did it again when we went to the next place. And I wrote a blog piece, a newsletter on this. And I just thought that's like completely, it is in one fell swoop, you're turning this into a transaction instead of a relationship. And you're saying that I am what I unfortunately used to think that fundraisers think, and I think some fundraisers might still think this, is that donors would be better off being a piggy bank because that's an inanimate object that doesn't talk back and you can smash it, get your money and run, and that's it. And when the relationship turns into that by something that's said or done, it's very hard to get it back. And it will stick with you. That interaction is going to stick with me more than everything else that I had heard from that organization. So it's really, yeah, that's important. Oh, one thing I'd say is also on the thank yous, video thank yous are super impactful. I just love them. And somebody called me a few months ago and said he was working on handwritten thank you notes to people. And I said, well, that's great. But, why are you doing? And he says, what color pen should I use? I think it was on the thank you note. And I'm sure some of you have seen a lot of this online, which makes me crazy. But somebody did it by season. I don't know if you saw that one, that she was like orange at Halloween and she was pink at Easter.
Most of us do school color. If we have a school color, we'll, the folks at Oklahoma State love an orange pen, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah, you do your orange pen.
Yeah.
So it's anyway, but so I said to him, that's the wrong question, is what color pen? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, how long does it take you to write a thank you note? He said, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes if I know the person. And I said, guess what? Pull out your phone, and how long would it take you to just do a very quick video and say, hey, it's me, thank you, that was so nice, and upload it? Maybe a minute. And he's like, well, that would save me a lot of time. I was like, yeah, and actually it's more impactful, at least as impactful. Now that's for someone like me, but I do want your clients to know that I did a lot of research for a couple of years on other donors to see if I was in some way different. And the answer is, the only way that I'm different, there's two ways now I'd say that I'm different than the average donor who's first generation wealthy, which 60% now of people who give are first generation wealthy. So that old money versus new money thing has switched a lot.
It has.
And right. And so so the only way that I think I'm different is, one is that I talk as a donor and I'm willing to say numbers and things, and that's different. I accept that. And the other thing is that I'm probably the only person who would have given that hospital 7 months before going to a different hospital. Other than that, I think you'll find that most of what I'm talking about, certainly in the people who have IPOs and et cetera, is pretty much the same. They're just not talking.
I totally agree with you. And I think everybody who's on the line is like, is this being recorded? Can I share this with my team? There are so many messages that we're hearing today that our guts tell us that we know what's right. And we're working on changing our organization's knee institutions, right? Because when you talk about an institution, changing institutional behavior is such a challenge. Can you tell me about a nonprofit who does ask you for feedback? And you don't have to name them, but tell me about the place maybe where you give, and it doesn't have to be your biggest gift. It can be an everyday gift, but where do you feel most valued?
Mm. Um, so when Josh and I started giving, one of the things that we just decided we were just going to do our best. We didn't, there wasn't like a class to take or something. So we just kind of guessed. But one of the things that's important to us is we both run lots of different businesses. And we thought, well, the nonprofit's a business. And if they want to know something from us, like what was it like when you were at a studio and you had to get creative, pass through the office, how did that work? Whatever, or legal things that we've been involved in, or financial things, or things that we could be helpful with. So our first criteria originally was that we didn't want to give money to anybody who wouldn't also let us participate in some way, which I know makes fundraisers really scared to death. But when I said that, we meant, can I volunteer? And most organizations will not let you volunteer. Once you are a major donor, you're in that major donor box, and you are not supposed to leave that box. And even a mid-sized donor, you are not supposed to go talk to the volunteers. And I know it's clean for the people who like that, I guess, and it's easy to understand, but it might be a little more messy if I'm volunteering and getting my hands dirty, but I'm going to be much more sticky. I'm going to be around longer if you let me do that. So, and the research now shows, and I'm sure you know this better than I do, Lynne, that younger people are saying they'll volunteer first and say, I want to know what this culture is like.
Absolutely. I think that one of the most precious things someone can give is their time, not just their money. Resources are finite, time is finite. And when you spend time with a nonprofit, you're not spending time with someone or something else. And so that being said, I'm going to jump into a topic that's always a hot button for us. I don't know if it's a hot button for you. We haven't explored this all the way, but we're going to talk a little bit about events. And there is this culture in our industry of, let's put a bunch of wealthy people in a room, feed them nice things and whatever Chardonnay we can afford. And that is an experience for them because they've been around other people like them, wealthy people, whether it be first generation wealth or inherited wealth. Tell me about your perspective as a donor on events. What do you like? What do you not like? And this is Lisa's world. So we're going to listen to Lisa and her perspective, but where do you spend your time when it comes to nonprofit events?
Okay, so first, the idea that they want this, they like vodka, they is already makes me want to go slip my wrist, because they're saying that because I have money, have been transformed into this alien being that's exactly the same as other people who have the same amount of money, and we're all the same and think the same way. And that is ludicrous and insulting. So that is, I understand it makes it easy to put people in a little box, but I'm going to smash out of that box. I am not interested. But for anyone to say to any of you, or anybody, that because you have your identity now is your money, we're going to now decide that you, and maybe one other identity piece, that you are then this. We are going to tell you about this person, and that's what you are. And they don't know me. So I think there's a lot more people, way more people, who would say that than there are people who would not. But as far as events are concerned, when we made that gift to Cedar Sinai, the $2 million, and I just realized I didn't do the payment one, but we can maybe go back to that later.
That's
but
okay.
when we did that, they said, by doing this, you're also going to be part of this support organization on this board, whatever. And I said, fine, but here's the deal. And I read the materials, and I read the materials, and they said, do you have any questions? I said, yes. Can I not go to those events, to the galas? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, I don't like them. My husband doesn't like them. I have 5 kids. I'm busy. Please don't make me. But if that's part of the deal, I'll just join something else. I really said this. It's okay. And they remembered that. And so they've been very gentle about, we have this. Would you like to get involved? We actually created a separate event that people like me kind of put together that was for families and made much more sense for us and made a lot of money. And I hosted it, and it was great. So, but the other thing is, I will go to a gala depending on maybe, if I know the person being honored, or if I am invited by somebody who I really care about and they need to have somebody to fill up the table, and I happen to be available. When I found out that in many cases, when I was part of one of the organizations, you'll read this in the book, and I was told, why don't we have this celebrity for this particular event? And I was told, that's fine as long as they can pay $50,000. And I said, what? And so their speakers had to pay. And then in addition, I had no idea that when you're honored, someone said to me once, that being honored is not an honor. You had to do all this other work. And I didn't know any of that until I really didn't know it until I was honored for something. And I thought, and so now I know to say, what are the expectations? I don't have time for this. But I didn't know. There wasn't like a rule book that I could find out from. So, but I do think that I also think virtual galas are here to stay, and the combination kind are my favorite. And I am probably equally, possibly more likely to give on a virtual event fundraiser than in person, because I don't feel like there's the people looking at me thing and who's going to give what and that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel awkward. It feels like I'm going to watch this for an hour or two, and somewhere in the middle of it, they're putting up the thing, and I'll say, okay, it's my time to give now. And I will. And it's great. And I feel, and I love when they say we've now raised this much from online and offline and everything. But if someone says, I really, I know Lisa, she has money, so she now loves rubber chicken. Sorry, no.
Yeah. We've experienced that more and more from our donors, that time is valuable. Like you said, you created an event where families are welcome. Yeah. Why should I have to leave my kids and the person I love the most behind, and spend an evening all dressed and fussed up and everything like that? And it's interesting that you said, oh, I'm going to be inducted into some society. Those are waning. Those days are waning where we do, you're getting a lot of love for the RBG.
Thank you. She watches over me when bad things happen.
Yeah. She watches over you. I love it. Can we go back to the pledge payment? So you and I had talked about that privately, but somebody asked you for money and then they said, oh, and don't worry, you can pay it in installments.
Yeah. I think that, well, first of all, I had no idea that was a thing when we first started. I just didn't know. And the installment thing, and if they use that word, again, instantly my mind goes to, am I buying a refrigerator or a stove or a vacuum cleaner? And it just sucks all of the life out of what I'm trying to do by being a giver. And it means that, and then my next thought after I think that is, oh, they were told that don't leave this meeting with Lisa until you come back with a check, even though checks are arcane, but are getting to be. So then I just think of all that. And instead, I don't think of the mission anymore. I don't think of the relationship. I kind of think, I want to get out of this room. And that's kind of what happens.
They turn a gift into a process is what happens. They turn a gift into a transaction. So let's flip it the other way. Tell me about the joy of giving. What does giving mean to you, to your spouse, to your children? Tell me about the joy that instills in you as someone who has the fortune to make a larger impact than some of us.
Yeah. Well, the big difference, obviously there's a lot of differences when you have money and between having money and not money but one of them is the access, and the access that it's provided me with to be able to meet some of these scientists directly, who I might not have been able to do as a mid-level donor. And I really, it bothers me that mid-level donors don't get the same kind of, that all donors don't get the same kind of access. But I learn a lot. I would say that's the most important thing, is that I learn a lot. And I feel like most of the time I have supported something that made a difference in some way. And I love matching gifts because of that reason. I can then bring in somebody else that way. I love finding out that something good has happened from what we gave. We have a food bank that we created, a kind of an alternative type of food thing here in Los Angeles. And I get an update a couple times a year saying, this is how many people we fed. How great is that? I'm like skipping around the rest of the day. And it's just the greatest thing ever. And then I, of course, read the research about how you live longer if you give. And so it's all good.
So let's put aside the fact that this has become a passion project for you in terms of teaching those of us, we get the opportunity to have you come to our organizations and speak, and come to our conferences and speak, and we get to read your book. But if we put that aside, and you were just to think about your day-to-day life before you dove in and were like, I'm going to help nonprofits fix this, how much of your life, or how after the IPO and after you and your husband came into the money that you now want to redistribute or, give away. How much of your daily thought is that? How much, does that hit you once a week? Does that hit you, outside of the work that you're doing? How often are you all talking about generosity? I call it generosity, not philanthropy, because you're right. I didn't grow up with philanthropy, but we were generous. And so I think everybody can be generous, and philanthropy kind of is too hoity-toity for me. I'm more down to earth. But how often are those discussions around generosity happening in your household?
We have a little bit of a crazy household, and we're all doing different things. And those discussions like with the household as a group don't happen very often. But I started donor advised funds for my kids when they were 5, my little ones, and for all my kids. And so it was extremely important to me that they understand that this is part of our life. And I believe this is part of everybody's life. And that's just what we do. It's like people who say, in our house, you go to church, or in our house, you go to college, and that's just what you do. We don't need to give you any reasons. It's just what you do. And here it's just what you do. Having said that, I've had about 200 events at our home, all nonprofits, a few political, but mostly nonprofits of various different kinds. And my little kids probably don't remember not going to sleep with sounds of people doing a pitch or talking or learning about something. And I'd invite them into the room if they wanted to come learn about what this organization is. But so they'll think that that's just the norm. And my kids, I'm proud to say that my 3 older kids, at one point, until just a few weeks ago, all 3 of them were working with nonprofits as a career, either part-time or full-time, and really making change. And it's really gratifying. And that's kind of, I think, the goal that most people have when they all of a sudden find they have money and they've grown up not with money, and they say, I just don't want to change, and I want to have the right values, and I want to instill them into my kids, and banging their heads like, oh, you have to do this. Like the wealth managers sometimes say, nothing against wealth managers, that we have to like figure out a way to get your kids to give to the same organization that you gave to. That's not okay. That's like, they should give, but I want them to feel empathy. I want them to feel gratitude. I want them to feel all of that. And we'll continue to kind of to do that.
How do you find out about new organizations? So, a lot of us have been giving to the same organizations over and over again, but also new nonprofits crop up. And with today's issues in social and racial justice or the environment, or, how do you have your head on a swivel? Or, I always say the best way to hear about a nonprofit is from another donor, because I like a reference point. But is there ever a case where you're going to pick up a brochure or receive a blind mailer, a mailer from that you don't know an organization? Like, how would you find out about a new organization to give to, or how would you obtain a new cause almost?
Yeah, so the mailers, not so much. They rarely will do anything. I don't care if they're fancy or not. They just normally don't do much for me. Yes, if there's a friend who's involved in an organization and it's somebody I trust, absolutely, I'm interested. Which is what I ask board members to do with nonprofits I consult to. That just, they don't have to go ask for money. They just have to say, here's my friend's address, and I'll send an email introduction to the 2 of you. And that's golden, and that's okay. So, but that means a lot. And then leaving me to meet somebody there and decide if I'm interested in it. Some people will call me and say, I'm involved in this new organization, or somebody called me. Here's one I got last week. I got an email, or met somebody at a cocktail party, and they do something that sounds very similar to other things that I know you do. Would you be willing to take a meeting with them, or at least have a call? And I'll say, sure, okay. And I'll usually do a call first and see if there's something, whatever. If they push for an in-person meeting first, not going to happen. Right. And I do very often say, just send me some materials. And some of them say, we won't send you the materials. We'll give you the materials when we meet with you. And I say, goodbye. And so it's kind of like that. I do think that I had expected our donor advised fund that I was with for the first 6 years that we had money. I expected them to introduce me to organizations that were similar. And yeah, I know. And for reasons that I talk about in the book that took me a while to figure out, that's never going to happen. We did start a new donor advised fund program that I started with one of the organizations I'm involved with. And they have started to do that and say, and it's neat. It's kind of like a crowdsourcing thing. What do they call it? A hive. So they actually will get a report, and it'll say, and it's also on their website when I make a grant, at the bottom of it, it'll say, hey, we realize a lot of our clients are concerned about, whatever it is, women's rights or something. And and they have two groups. I love the woman who put this together. She's amazing. And it'll say, here's some organizations that your fellow donor advised fund members have given to recently and have vetted. And the second section is, here's recommendations from our staff of things that they think you might be interested in.
That.
I do too, right? And the staff often tends to be younger, so they'll know about cutting edge things. And then I can communicate that to my kids. I think that's brilliant. So
that reminds me of the last time I was in a Barnes and Noble. They have an entire section of staff reads. And those are books that I wouldn't have picked up, that the staff clearly has time to, and they love books and they read more often. And I think there's something to be said for, what is someone who's different from me recommending? Because, at a certain point, every single one of us lives in a bubble. We live in our bubble with our friends, with our influencers, with our, media and everything. If I want to diversify my giving and I want to think about the world, what are other people giving to that are not like me? And then for the donor advised fund to say, and here are what people like you are giving to as well. Yeah, right. I think both of those are really powerful and serve the donor well. I think oftentimes we get confused in nonprofits, especially in the fundraising arm. Part of our job is to serve as advisors to donors and say, let me help you. And maybe my organization isn't the best for this gift at this time. So my last question, and y'all put in some more questions if you have them for Lisa.
I have a question for you too, Lynne.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So my question is, mid-level donors that don't get the love. I'm sure you have something to say about that, and I mentioned it a little bit ago. I just think that's awful, and I also think that a lot of people, I hear stories all the time about somebody who gave $100, wanted to see what happened, and then the next said, yeah, you got it. The next year gave 1,000 or more, and I just this sort of relegating you to the out there if you aren't a major donor makes me upset and sad.
It's a tragedy of our industry. It is embedded classism, to be honest, that we think that somebody who gives $10,000 is worth more than a $100 donor, even though that $100 may be much larger of a sacrifice than the $10,000 is proportionately. I mean, if you look at the top 20 wealthiest individuals in the United States, they give less than 1% of their worth away, but it's large dollars because they have large pots of money. The poorer you are in America, the more generous you are, in fact. And so I have been building over the last 5 to 8 years an entire system of thanking and treating donors based on their behavior, not their amount. So we know that 70% of first-time gifts are tests. Say, for example, I give you $2,500 out of my donor advised fund. Well, the fact that I have a donor advised fund should send off warning signals and things to you. Yeah. But we're just so ingrained in the way we've always done it that we don't look at donors as individuals. They're almost like, if you don't fit in this box on this date, at this time and given this way, then we have nothing for you. And it's like, this is almost a full circle discussion when we were talking about, when we started this conversation, what happens when I just call you and say, I'd like to give you $1 million? Why is this so difficult? Because if I call Apple or I call Tiffany and Company and say, I'd like to spend $1 million,
come on in,
make it happen, and doors swing open, and things happen. So I think it's also about understanding human nature, and sometimes we lose sight of the donor for the gift, and we treat people as gifts and not donors. And that is something that, I always say, don't thank for the gift, thank for the donor and how wonderful of a person they are.
I love that.
So Melanie, who's been a longtime listener, has a great question. Do you have cycles of giving, such as giving to one organization, one type of organization for a while, and then shifting focus to other areas? I know you're Jewish. It's Rosh Hashanah, so happy Rosh Hashanah soon.
Thank you.
Are there times of year that you give? What's your behavior like? What is your pattern?
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because most of it, there's not really a pattern with, unless it's somebody who, I have an organization I'm on the board of. I've been on the board for years. I have an annual commitment that I've agreed to, and I always pay it more or less at the same time. Although I figured out this thing recently that I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm on the board and I've been able to see cash flow, and cash flow for nonprofits is usually not so great in Q2, for example. Can I just take that amount that I'm paying anyway during the year and give it to you in Q2 and it helps you? And they're like, sure. And I thought, why doesn't everybody do that? That was pretty easy. So it was the same money, and it was already in a donor advised fund, so it didn't really matter what the timing was. So I am trying to kind of disrupt those cycles a little bit, but more to help the organization more. I think the only thing that I do that's really in a cycle and I don't even know if you call that one an example, is when there's life events that happen. So there's things happening in Ukraine, there's things happening in Afghanistan, there's something happening at my back door, there's people who are suffering. I will be one of those people who will say, okay, I need to move some stuff around. And I will also think about things that I plan to give, didn't tell the people I was going to give it, and think, you know what, I need to take a year off from that one because I need to give this one. And one thing I do want to make really clear is that donors don't know that they're expected to give every year and to give more. No one tells us that. We're just supposed to know it. And if you look at my book, you'll see an immediate, one of the things that happened to us that'll make you laugh. But there is, I kept thinking, it's like that, what they call it, gaslighting. Did I have a conversation with them and say that I meant to have this every year? Like, because they'll talk it. And the way that it usually is said to me is, we'd like to talk to you about increasing your annual gift. And they always say it almost the same way. And I think, what annual gift? I didn't give you an annual gift. I gave you a gift. And that's another problem I think that's inherent in this sector and in these arcane rules that we're playing with, that I'm trying desperately to change, because that's just not good. And if they hadn't done that and they said, gee, would you be gracious enough to do that again this year? And this year we're working on this, and last year we accomplished that. Sure, I'm here. So,
yeah. And I think also just existing is not a reason for me to give. You know what I mean? What are you working on that's new? What can I invest in that's different? Do you know what I mean? And if it is ongoing support, then let's make that clear. Let's communicate that to people. But just saying it's that time of year again, you need to give, that's not a case for support.
And one of the funniest things is when people call me at the end of the year and they say, well, it's the end of the year. We know you're doing your giving now. No, then you don't know me, because I have a donor advised fund, and it makes absolutely no difference if I give at the end of the year or during the year. So go do your homework and call the next person, because that's just crazy. But it will happen this year too.
I think that's an underlying theme of this conversation that I'm just so grateful for, is we are human beings, donors are individuals. Doing our homework is the least we can do. And I think there are so many of us with grateful hearts for you today. I think this video is going to go far and wide. And so I just want to thank you, because I know how hard you work. You are a brave, and we love women with gumption here at Donor Relations Guru Group. And it takes one to know one, right? And I love it. And I know that we all have gotten better today as a result of you. And that probably is one of the most valuable gifts you can give. And also to normalize generosity and to say, I'm going to give, and it's a joyful act, and I'm so happy to give, but also because I care about you, I'm going to hold you accountable. You know, my best friends in the world, don't let me slide. They hold me accountable.
That's what a relationship is.
Donors need to hold us accountable. We're in a relationship. And so I'm so grateful that you are investing and care enough to say, wait a minute, this is wacky. We got to do this better. So everybody, you can catch her at Philanthropy Revolution is the name of her book. It's available on Amazon. Also, I have Lisa's contact information. So if you needed to have a private conversation with Lisa, if you want to have her come in and talk to your group so that it's not one of your donors speaking, we will connect you offline. But Lisa, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
I love hanging out with you. We're going to do it more in the future, but thank you so much, Lisa, for being here today.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.